So good evening, everyone. Wish you enjoyed today's evening. And basically, we're going to start from the most boring part of our content. I'm really hoping it won't be as boring as it sounds. This conversation will be related to a privacy topic within cloud service providers and interrelations between them, because it's very popular stuff. It's getting more and more popular and more wanted. And really, we decided to focus on this topic because there are many rumors among that, and just to show that it's not as complicated as it seems. And there is some mandatory stuff which is available for almost anyone who's either using cloud service provider or even is providing a service as a cloud service provider. So, of course, we'll discuss types of cloud service providers. We'll stop on a little brief over regulations. We'll share some tips to pay attention during the vendor review. We'll focus on transparency and why it's so important and the benefits of it. And of course, what stands behind the privacy policy and why it's the most important part as well. By 2020, no cloud policy will be as rare as no internet policy as is today. It was a prediction made by Gartner in 2016, so almost 4 years ago. And here we are in 2020, and it's almost impossible to find any company which is not using at least a SaaS service. Probably there are some companies that do not have any on-premise systems, but they still do use at least one SaaS. A quick story about myself. My name is Julian, and I work as a compliance manager in security department at Wrike for almost 3 years. I work in information security area for about almost 10 years, and I love dogs. So some more information can be found in my LinkedIn profile, so there we go. A quick intro about what actually Wrike is, in case if you're here for the first time and you haven't even known about our product. We are a leading work management solution. So we provide a SaaS project management tool, which is available in web browser form, mobile application, and desktop. We offer a lot of integrations, so you can get more detail on our website, wrike.com. As about our workaround, we have 20,000+ customers worldwide, more than 2 million users. We are resident in California. Our HQ is in San Jose. We have offices across the world in Ireland, in Australia, in Japan, in Russia, of course, and here in Prague. And we have customers in all over 150 countries. Let's continue with our main topic. We'll start from the easier scenario and come to more complicated examples. So hope everything will be clear. The most popular types of cloud service providers are listed here. It's, of course, well-known infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and Wrike is a good example of software as a service model, and private cloud. And what unites them is that some part of the services is within responsibility of the cloud service provider, the company which provides the service to the customers. And on the other hand, there is a scope of things that are on customer's side of responsibility. And this is what unites all the clouds. The key terms we're going to use in this talk, just not to make it too much comprehensive, there are the major three. It's the definition of what personal data is, it's the data controller, and the data processor. There are a lot of more terms where, and you can actually use some web resources after this conversation. I will provide the things to look at. And what we are not going to talk, it's the fees and penalties, because we are not here for selling fear. We are here for think of how to simplify our life and provide probably some solutions. So basically, the two main items we are going to focus at are the GDPR law and the, as I mentioned, we are the resident of California. We also fall under California Customer Protection Act. So what is significantly different between those two laws is that CCPA was actually the first ever developed law which establishes responsibility for buying and selling personal data. It happens when you switch to any lead generation engine. That's where CCPA comes in. And of course, here in Czech Republic, and there is the Personal Data Processing Act, which goes in parallel with the GDPR, and it's more related to closing the gaps between Czech national context and the GDPR. So, as I mentioned, those two core data processing acts, which are GDPR and CCPA, they are very similar. They both define almost the same scope. In just maybe a difference is that GDPR is focused on the natural person, and the CCPA is focused on the devices themselves. Controller and processing definition, they both have them, and the data processing. And what is actually the difference is what I've actually said. It's about opting out, prohibiting to buy and sell data, and the controls which are focused on that area as well. The goals to be achieved while building any privacy program. The key 5 goals. First is to know where and what kind of personal data is processed within your environment. The second thing is to know in what case any data, your third-party provider becomes either a controller or a processor. Because it, even if they do process some personal data, it doesn't happen in all cases. Of course, the necessity to establish retention rules for personal data according to business needs. Because really, we have some flexibility. Nobody asks us to delete all the personal data by the request of the data subject. We still have this right to identify the retention rules. And when they are identified, we can use them. Of course, it's the disposition procedure, which goes after the third goal. And the dealing with customer feedback. So you need to know what kind of requests you would receive and how to process them, and what would be the communication chain of custodian. So first, it's not that hard as it seems. So achieving those 5 goals, it's not the hardest part. The hardest part is actually to maintain them and keep them up to date. And all those 5 goals can be reached if you integrate into your existing processes, even if you have tried to implement the information security management systems and you have some processes in place like asset management, risk management, supply chain management, and a lot of them. We'll walk them through. So we are starting to work and to provide our service, either a website, and we'll start from the most simple case. It's the website. So anybody who opts in our website, he provides quite a typical number of personal data here on the left side. But often it doesn't end with the website, because the website itself can be integrated with some helpful engines which make more flexible use, probably increase the amount of leads. So there are analytics tools. They can be either internal or external. and there might be, as I said, like lead enrichment engines. And how does this picture look in legal terms? It looks actually like this. So the data subject is the person who opts in. This process of now it worked. So this process is actually called data collection. It goes to the website who belongs to the data controller. So the person who defines the goals for processing the personal data is the data controller. So this is the owner of the website. And then the data goes outside of the environment. It goes to somewhere, let it be third-party providers, just for simplicity, and they become the data processor. So they process data on behalf of the controller, and they can sometimes provide feedback. And then this picture changes a little bit. So in case if this data goes bypassing the website first to some data processing engine, he becomes a controller, and he returns data back unless it's not defined oppositely by the documents. So it's this side is on legal's area responsibility. The next scenario, it's a bit more complicated. In this case, it's almost the same, but instead of website, we have a SaaS service, a cloud service provider. It can be not SaaS, it can be anything. And we have an data subject's employer as a customer. In this case, this employer becomes a data controller. Because good practice is to sign the data processor agreement between this cloud service provider and the employer, because employer collects data from all the subjects which are end users. And so first, their employee control collects an amount of data, and then part of this data, mostly part of this data, goes to the cloud service. But it's not the end, because every cloud service can have some integrations, some third parties, some processors. And guess what? It's almost the same. If a significant amount of personal data goes to any third party and is being processed there, it is a must to sign the DPA and turn them to data sub-processors, which should be published on publicly available website and be shown to a customer by any request. Yeah, it's getting more complicated. So what actually to do with this? That model looks pretty simple when the cloud service provider isn't big enough or is growing or doesn't have a mess of third-party integrations and integrations between integrations. So first, when the company is growing, the responsibility is growing as well. And if the area, if the expansion is also growing, there are becoming more and more laws to comply with. The amount of customers is also growing, and the amount of data subjects is growing. So it's growing the percentage of potential reaching out from the data subjects and the cost of reputation. Any violation of the privacy law really harms the reputation a lot, and it's not a secret. What actually we have in reality? We have a lot of unstructured data because as a cloud service provider generally does not have direct access to customers' data. There is some business logic above that who actually doesn't give a damn how it's working. And there is a poor data protection officer who receives the requests and tries to find a solution among this business logic. So how to start properly managing the vendors? First activity is the most difficult one, so you have to pull out all possible vendors you're working with. And first thing to start with is to nominate proper data classification labels. Because by properly data classifying all the vendors and the data which is processed within them, you don't get just a no-name amount of vendors that's saying they process personal data, What personal data do they process? Is it just contact information, or which is and the amount of which is not very big and significant? Is there any sensitive personal data like healthcare, racial, philosophy, religion, and so on? And why the hell are they being processed there? Of course, a separate category of the vendors is the ones that are used within the product, and they provide a service on behalf of your company name. This is the most critical area because this is the top one number of sub-processors which should be listed. The ones which are used on behalf of your service and within it. And of course, it is absolutely necessary to establish data flows between the integrations with the cloud service providers. There is no need to deep dive in their infrastructure. You just need to know what goes on their input and what you get from them in the output and where it goes then, because it can get back to your application and it can go to any other cloud service provider or any other subprocessor. So you need to maintain this business logic and know where this data is actually transferring, and it's very useful while dealing with the incidents. So this is a data flow cheat sheet, which shows the core items which should be covered during the review and on which you should focus, bringing yourself to compliance to any privacy regulation. So it's data classification and knowing what data is actually being processed. So if your company never processes sensitive PII, it's quite simple. You really simplify your life a lot. You don't need to implement additional controls. Where does it come from? So all inputs. Where it may be transferred, all outputs, all possible outputs. How I interact with data subjects. So it's dealing with data subject requests. There is actually a limited amount of data subject requests. It's about 5 of them. It's disposition request. It's provide me a copy of personal data, provide me a copy of my account, update my personal data, which generally can be performed through self-service. Provide the it's a funny one. Provide a clarification that you don't sell my data. We of course we don't do this, but we get this request because the CCPA law allows customers to make sure that the company doesn't sell their data. And how handling the incidents, the chain of custody, which I've already mentioned, the communications chain. So you know the contact points from each of your cloud service providers you can reach out to. And good practices of the vendor review overall. Just summarizing this. The easiest way to check the vendor is to do it before purchasing than while using, because once you haven't signed the contract, you can add more terms. You can request for additional security deep dive review if for some reason the cloud service provider does not have any necessary information available or isn't agreeing to share it even under NDA. It's your right to perform a security assessment and make sure that security controls are in place. Also, the separate inventory for all cloud service providers should be maintained because it's completely different. It has an absolutely different data model than performing an inventory for on-premise systems. It's not related to servers and workstations. It's related to the amount of data, the contract, necessary artifacts, which are necessary for security reviews, for example, non-disclosure agreements, data protection agreements. So it should be all stored in a separate inventory because the process is absolutely different. And of course, don't forget about data disposition rules, because the contract might terminate and you will never know what happens to your data. It can stay permanently on the servers of cloud service providers and live longer than actually the customer. And of course, it's very important to establish data disposition period during signing a contract. It's one of the key terms. And talking about transparency, what can actually help us to assess the vendors and to keep us in a loop with process, especially if we want to look pretty in the eyes of our customers. These are actually my two favorites. It's the extension to 27001 standard. It's the 27018. The practice for protection of personal data in the cloud. And really, the Cloud Security Alliance is a community for cloud service providers related to security topics, and they have two interesting toolkits. So they have the Consensus Assessment Initiative Questionnaire, which is called also the CAIC. They released the version 3.1 end of the last year, and they added some extra items related to data privacy, and as they are focused on the artifacts which you must show the tenants. So like you go through this spreadsheet and there is a plenty of questions with answer yes or no. So like, do you provide your tenants with this information or that information? And it's quite easy to collect the list of all necessary information. The tenants can actually ask you. It's all here. And there is also a GDPR toolkit available on their website, so you can download and have a look. A very interesting thing to become when you have almost anything. Don't have almost anything. The second thing is actually bringing you one step up to enterprise grade, because it's an external certification to the international standard. I know it's quite popular. The latest version of the standard was released in 2019, and it was extended to add controls of a new standard 2910 for the public cloud computing environment. The benefit of this standard is actually that it consists of two parts. I've told about the second part, and the first part is what I've mentioned, is building those privacy processes over the existing ones. So it's like on top of the information security management system. It's an extension to the controls, which shows which of them are connected to privacy topic, which should be enhanced and how. So if it's risk management, there should be also privacy risk assessed. If it's asset inventory with data classification and labeling, it should include also labels for personal data. And we successfully passed this certification end of last year, so it was quite interesting exercise, and really recommend it to all if you want to improve your privacy framework. And last but not least, there is a new standard which was also released last year, is the Privacy Management System 27701. It's the most mature of all ISO standards related to personal data. And it's like a separate privacy management system. So if you want to focus on that, go ahead. It's 27701. And last but not least, it's the privacy policy. The privacy policy should go step one, but I decided to include it in the end after just to summarize it all and just to understand why it's important. It's your face. It's the face of any company, and the privacy policy is as necessary as signing a DPA, a data protection addendum. It's like public terms of service, which establishes roles and responsibilities of the data controller on one hand and the data subject on the other hand. And the data subject feels safe if he knows that he has enough rights to reach out to the controller, and the controller will take all possible actions to solve the problems of data subject. So first, the privacy policy should be focused on your target audience. So if you are providing service to customers, it should be customer focused. If you do want to add some extra items, go ahead. Nobody limits to the amount of privacy policies depending on the case. But it's not cool when it's like a lead generation engine which is having privacy policy talking about how they handle CV of the candidates. It's, well, it's weird. establish roles and responsibilities, and of course provide contact information of the data privacy officer or the data protection office, whatever it is. The subject must know how he will be able to reach out if his rights for some reasons are violated, or to solve the problem. It's the customer facing stuff. And also one item, it's quite funny, but I have met some cases when privacy policy actually conflicted with terms of service. Just one extra item, make sure they don't conflict each other. So that's actually it. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll gladly answer.